Entrando em contato com atendimento ao cliente. Para muitas pessoas é um jeito fácil de arruinar um bom dia, mas na Zendesk nós deixamos a experiência do cliente melhor. Melhor para sua avó, melhor para o seu vendedor preferido de flores, melhor para o cara do apartamento 3A, melhor para você, melhor para todos. Porque enquanto alguns dizem que o cliente sempre tem razão, nós dizemos que o cliente é sempre humano. E como seres humanos, queremos fazer algo melhor para todos nós. Zendesk, experiência do cliente com IA desenvolvida para humanos.
Você que está ouvindo esse podcast, o que acha de uma empresa que sempre trabalha para trazer impacto positivo? Assim é o Google. Como? A Duda da Orbi é um exemplo disso. Ela usa a inteligência artificial para ajudar pessoas a recuperarem seus movimentos. É a tecnologia mais útil na vida das pessoas. E tem o Jefferson da Tributei, que usa inteligência artificial para facilitar o dia a dia das empresas. Eles e milhares de empreendedores geraram mais de 188 bilhões com as plataformas do Google. Tem que ser bom para todo mundo.
Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode, and I've got John Graham with us today. He's a 3-time USA memory champion, and he's showing others how he forever released his panic attacks and chronic anxiety in today's day of mental, emotional wellness. He's a great guest to have, and I'm really excited to have him on the show. So John, welcome.
Yeah, I'm happy to share my story and inspire others. Yeah, just be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I know. Start off with how you got started and your journey. I know you had issues with panic, anxiety, and panic attacks, and how you got over that. And now you're teaching others to do the same.
Yeah, it's all started 10 years ago. So people assume being a memory champion that I have a naturally gifted mind, like I'm just born this way. And it's actually not true at all. I read a book called Moonwalking with Einstein back in 2014 that talked about ordinary people who learn mental techniques to memorize massive amounts of information, just like using your brain the way it wants to be used to remember and retain. And I started practicing these techniques and realized really quickly that they worked. So I signed up for the World Memory Championships, like 6 months into the training, probably less than that. And I completely bombed. I went to this competition and almost walked out a few times because the pressure was so intense. My heart was racing. The demons in my head were putting me down. You can't do this. It was just probably the most psychological stress I've ever been under. And I realized at that moment that not only did I have to learn these techniques to succeed, but I had to overcome this pressure, this inner resistance. And on my way to the top, to becoming a champion 3 times over, I had to overcome these inner demons. I had to not only do that for memory, but I was creating businesses. I'm a father of 3 little girls. So all of these things tested me and I had to learn how to overcome. My main story is I tried all of the mental methods, the supplements, the meditations, the hypnosis, the therapy, all of this stuff to overcome it and it didn't work. It only made it worse. I was having daily panic attacks at one point. I realized the actual root of this issue was emotional. And that's really what I teach now is how I overcame them, addressing the emotional root issue.
Yeah, interesting. And it's interesting how you correlate these memory techniques with training your mind and brain, which I want to delve into a little bit deeper later on in the conversation and talk about what mental techniques do you find most effective in enhancing performance and how do they interplay with managing anxiety and sounds like suffering from imposter syndrome or kind of choking, these types of common psychological phenomenon at high levels?
Yeah, it's a really good question because there's an intricate dance here. At the very root, if I'm being completely honest about myself, the reason I needed success and achievement and all of these accolades was because at my core, I was not okay. I needed all these things. And I was never, no matter how many trophies I got, how many awards I got, I still was not okay. So that drive, which is good, that drive for success at its core has a lot of junk in the way. So if we're talking about performance, there are all these techniques about mindset, about peak performance, about supplements, about getting yourself into a peak state that will get you to levels of performance, but they won't overcome the very root issue. And you'll always be seeking, always be doing, and you'll exhaust yourself. So on my way to the top, drove myself into the ground. My mind, I had all the mental tools, all the reframes, all the stuff. But what was happening was I was pushing down all of the nastiness, all the suppressed emotion that was trying to come up, right? That's anxiety. That's all this rumination, overthinking. It's the root of it is an emotional root issue. So what I'm really trying to say is I idolized performance at one point, but I don't anymore. I think there's greater methods of embodiment and release that will help you get to where you really want to go and release all the resistance inside of you. So you feel good and you become your highest potential.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So one thing is because you talked about getting to the core root of the problem, and a lot of it's based on some sort of emotional trauma suffered during childhood, and it manifests itself as guilt or shame or overachievement. What did you find effective that was helping you address these inner demons and releasing those?
Yeah. So the real root is not one thing that happened. It's an accumulation of suppressed emotion. So basically, every single moment that you've ever pushed away in your life is still inside of you. It's suppressed in our cells, suppressed in our DNA. All the tension is holding it in, right? If people have anxiety, if they're overthinkers, they're incredibly tense, like I used to be, in your shoulders and your neck. And that tension just holds all of that in. So it's trying to release. So what helped me is, number one, is having a fully regulated nervous system. Because I think 95% of our culture, our world is not regulated. They're always on the go, always thinking, always busy, always tense, right? And we're conditioned that way. It's not our fault, but you have to relax your muscles. You have to learn how to fully relax your body, release that deep tension. And I teach a process that walks people through that. But I would lay down every single day, release all the muscles in my body, release control of my breath, just let go, like physically let go, so that my mind would let go, so that all of this stuff would optimize on its own, because we get in our own way. The reason we have so much resistance is because we're trying to force everything, trying to control everything, trying to get everything we want, and we're resisting reality. And in that resistance, we cause all of this inner issue. By physically letting go, by letting go of our breath, our mind, and our bodies, we release this tension and we start letting go internally. So that was the first step for me.
Yeah, interesting. It reminds me because I wake up early and then just like midday, it's like just a reset. And I just basically I need to lay down and just do what you are exactly doing, just like release. And it's like really interesting phenomenon. The other question I have for you is this idea, because a lot of high performers, high achievers, they're striving for something, they're running away from something. And compare and contrast, because there's different ways of dealing with trauma. There could be like the overachiever, or there could be like the homeless drug addict, or addictions, and all of these. It's this yin and yang. But so a lot of the audience are high performers. And what is the difference between like this striving and overachieving from somebody that's coming from a traumatized state versus someone that's coming from a place where you help clients achieve that state?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I can speak to myself and maybe people identify these suppressed emotions. People call them trauma. I never like that word because there's so much wrapped around that word. Everyone has their own take on what that word means, but really these suppressed emotions form who we are. We're conditioned to be who we are. And so for me, why did I want to attain world-class status and be on all these TV shows and win all these awards and make all this money, right? It was because I needed validation. I wanted people to appreciate me, to look up to me, and that's a sort of a people-pleasing behavior, right? Because I learned at a very young age that people, maybe my parents or teachers, were disappointed in me when I did certain things, but they loved me and approved of me when I did other things. So that conditioned a response to seek love, right? So we seek external things, right? You talk about a drug addict versus someone who's productive and a workaholic. It's the same thing. We are suppressing it, whether you overwork or watch porn or drink or do drugs. It's what you're doing is you're trying to pacify an energy, an emotion in you that's trying to come up, right? That's uncomfortable. Because how many of us could just sit for a day? Just imagine just taking the day off and just sitting all day doing nothing. How many of you, like, be honest, would that be unbearable? Why would sitting be unbearable? Because you feel like you got to do something. Like that drive, that energy inside of you that's arising is so uncomfortable that you have to do something about it. And basically, you're escaping. It's a form of escape. It's a running away. And you try to seek external things like money and awards and accomplishments to validate and feel good. I realized very quickly that it was one day I was like, oh my gosh, this never ends. This never ever ends. You will always feel productive. You will always want more money. You will always want the next level. And I realized I have to change this. And so I woke up and tried to get all the stuff out of the way that was blocking me from feeling happy, instead of seeking happiness through the world that we see, touch, and smell.
It's interesting what you're describing, because a lot of clients, like I see a lot of people like basically running away from their past. Basically, and someone grew up with no money, and then basically they're chasing money because they need that certainty. And then if you just let go and allow the process that you're describing, it's actually much easier, and you actually get much further ahead, which is, it's really fascinating because you're still doing the same thing, but you're just coming from a different place energetically. One thing is interesting is what's in these mental techniques, and you talk about chaos method for winning, and how can this approach be applied? What is that? It's quite interesting.
Yeah. So while I was training and winning championships, right, the US Memory Championship consists of stage events where you go out on stage with everyone else, and it's elimination style. So for example, the first event used to be where you'd have 15 minutes to memorize a list of words, as many words as you can. And each contestant would have to say the next word into the microphone and then pass the microphone. So if you made a mistake, you're out. So there's a lot of pressure. So instead of just like training in a quiet room with words and like my memory techniques and relaxing, I realized I needed to train for the pressure. So I would simulate pressure in my training. So I would make my training harder than the war, harder than the actual event, so that when I got to the event, it seemed like normal or a piece of cake. So what I would do was I would train where I would chug a bunch of water, so I had to pee, right? Which is uncomfortable. I would drop down and do 20 push-ups, holding my breath. And then I would get up, sit down, put on headphones, which had a podcast blasting in my ear, a podcast that I actually wanted to listen to. So I have to pee. My heart's racing. I'm out of breath. I'm listening to a really loud podcast that I want to listen to. My mind is telling me, this is stupid. Stop doing this. Go downstairs and be with your family. Give up, right? All of this stuff, physical, psychological stress that I just trained through that. I would force myself to bring my awareness back to what I was doing and, fall back into all of my training. And I trained that way. And it was very successful because it helped me win multiple championships and prepare for that stress. Most of the time when I was actually on stage, I thought, man, I'm so glad that I trained with that chaos, because this is easier now.
It reminds me of, because it reminds me of just the residency interview process. And one program I interviewed at was interesting. They had all these distractions, overhead speaker blaring, or just the interviewer on their cell phone, or just real random things. And they wanted to see how you kept your calm under pressure, which is interesting.
I love that. I love that. Very cool.
Yeah. This is, you've overcome anxiety. You've achieved significant success. Sounds like you learned how to deal with your inner demons. How do you inspire others to move beyond their mental struggles? What's next? And because I know you're on this podcast and you're trying to help others see the light. So what's next for you?
What's next is helping people just like me, like the past recovering high achievers. I wouldn't say recovering, because I really want people to reach their highest potential, but coming from a place where you're okay on the inside, where you're not doing it to just satiate a wound or a hole inside of you, right? You come from a whole place where you can serve the world and reach your highest potential. And the reframe I'll give you is what most people do when they're experiencing something negative. They feel a negative emotion. There's a negative resistance. Most people, what they try to do is they pacify it or run away from it. They'll try to calm down and listen to a guided meditation. They'll go for a walk, whatever. Nothing wrong with those things. But that in that moment, a portal opens. I call these portals to higher potential. And this is what I teach, right? It's basically alchemizing all of the suppressed emotion inside of you to reach your highest potential. When something negative has happened, instead of turning away, we need to lean into it and collect that higher potential, because your suppressed emotions are your suppressed potential. They're causing all these suppressed emotions are causing all your unconscious behaviors, all your reactivity, it's draining all of the mental emotional space. It's causing overthinking. It's causing paralysis and procrastination, anxiety. When we transmute that energy, when we feel and allow that energy to move through us, instead of resist it or push it back down or escape, it transmutes. And we actually literally expand our capacity to hold more life force energy. So you talked about peak performance, right? Peak performance is, and I'm holding up a mug for those listening. Peak performance, imagine you only have this much capacity of this mug. If anything else overwhelms you, or emotions or mental goes above and over, it'll overflow and you won't be able to contain it. And you'll feel zapped. You'll feel exhausted. And peak performance tries to force yourself into higher states. So you only have that limited capacity. But if you alchemize and you collect this higher potential, your capacity literally expands out. And you're able to hold more capacity of energy, because less and less stuff bothers you. You're not bothered by things. You're not drained by things. And you start to embody qualities of certainty, of confidence, of fearlessness, of being unbotherable, uninhibited, instead of performatively forcing yourself to feel this way. You see the difference, where performance is a force and embodiment is the way you are. So what I teach is increases the capacity to hold more energy, but also your highest potential and traits.
Very interesting. I love how you describe that, just expanding your consciousness. And one guest, she was talking about moving into higher vibration states, and then I love this idea versus trying and forcing and doing versus being, embodiment. How can people find you and follow you, check out your work, work with you?
Yeah, I think the best way currently, I'm in a transition to creating a new program. So follow me on Instagram at memoryjohng. You can also go to my website, my current website. It'll be changing soon, but I'll redirect you. You can go to releasepanic.com, and there's a freebie at releasepanic.com/free. If you want to watch more in-depth video of what I'm talking about and how to do this yourself, you can sign up there. But I'm happy to answer any questions through social media. I'm very open and honest and willing to help people expand.
I really enjoyed this conversation, and it's really a lot of corollaries. And for all the audience, be sure to give John's socials you can follow and check out his techniques and reach out to him and work with him. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Christopher. Happy to be here. Great questions, great conversation. I appreciate it.